there's $288 billion based on the last account, $288 billion allocated in the venture capital space every single year. Less than 1% goes to Black people.
Wow.
Less than 0.036% goes to Black women. So unless you're telling me that Black people and Black women are not entrepreneurial, don't have great ideas, are not able to scale businesses, something is wrong with that number.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to a brand new episode of Techish, and we have a very special guest. This connection came about after the very recent Afrotech conference in Houston. I was at an incredible event hosted by Div Inc., and Mr. Alphonso David was there talking about the amazing work that he is doing at the Global Black Economic Forum. He was also speaking very passionately about the Fearless Fund case, which we've covered so much on this show, which he, of course, was general counsel for the Fearless Fund. So you can imagine I ran up to him as soon as that talk was over and begged him to come on the show. I know he's a very busy man, but he has granted us 20 minutes of his precious time to answer a few questions for our global community. So, Alphonso, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Where are you in the world today?
I am in New York City today. I've traveled quite a bit over the past few weeks, but I'm happy to be back home.
Amazing. Now, when I follow you on Instagram, see you posting on LinkedIn and Twitter, I can see that you are very in demand, gracing stages where very powerful leaders are gathering. I saw Fortune just did a piece on you. So I was just curious, what's sort of keeping you busy as the CEO of the Global Black Economic Forum?
Well, a lot of our work is making sure that we break down the barriers for economic opportunity for marginalized communities, right? It's unfortunate, but we still live in a global environment where people of color and other marginalized groups confront significant challenges. The wealth gap, unfortunately, is increasing here in the United States. When Martin Luther King gave his speech on the March on Washington, the wealth gap was 8-1 between white Americans and Black Americans. And today is 12-1. So if you're an entrepreneur, if you're looking to scale your business, if you're looking to grow your business in any meaningful way, unfortunately, there are many obstacles that you confront, whether it be access to capital or just simply trying to create an infrastructure that's sustainable. And so a lot of my time is spent trying to create opportunities and break down those barriers that exist for people of color and other marginalized communities. And we do that in a number of ways. We have summits and conferences. We hold our own summit. We have a business summit and a public convention at the Essence Festival of Culture. We also do other events around the world. We have a leadership development company called the Academy for Advancing Excellence. And what we do there is go in and work with corporations in institutional assessments or talent pipeline work or leadership development generally. And then we do a fair amount of policy work, litigation, legislation, and policy. And so I spend a lot of my time working in those three pillars, whether it be summits and conferences, leadership development work, or policy. It takes up an extraordinary amount of time, unfortunately, right now.
Yeah, no, that sounds incredible. And I love the systematic approach and the fact that you are making an impact at every level. We hope that is what will really accelerate positive change. I guess across those three pillars that you've just outlined, I'd be curious to hear what are some of the most exciting projects on your plate right now, or the ones at least at the forefront of your mind?
Well, with respect to leadership development, I think we've seen an attack on diversity, equity, and inclusion, unfortunately. We've seen how the concept of diversity, equity, and inclusion has been subverted. People forgot why diversity, equity, and inclusion exists. It exists because today we still have the majority of CEOs are white men. We only have 2 Black women who are serving as Fortune 500 CEOs. We have the majority of people in the C-suite happen to be men, not women, and certainly not people of color. So diversity, equity, and inclusion exist in order to break down some of those barriers that exist in corporate spaces and in the marketplace. So what I'm excited about right now is really addressing that misinformation and disinformation that relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and getting back to why does this exist in the first place? Why are we really talking about it? Because when you read the press, what you often hear is X, Y, or Z company is doing away with their diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. But no one really is asking how many Black, brown, or women, brown people or women do they have on their board of directors?
Yeah.
How many women, Black people, or brown people do they have in their C-suite? No one is asking those questions. And they're ignoring why diversity, equity, and inclusion exists in the first place. And I think that's really important for us as we think about living in an environment where there's so much misinformation, where people forget why these principles exist in the first place. It is not a coincidence that we live in a country where people are trying for us to forget our history,
Yes.
right? They're making sure that we don't teach Black history. So when we're talking about issues like diversity, equity, and inclusion, of course, it's not surprising to me that people don't know why it exists in the first place because we don't teach about it.
Yeah.
So that is a huge part of the work that I'm doing right now. We're also working with investors, making sure that investors understand what the current legal landscape looks like. I'm working with an organization called the Freedom Economy. And the Freedom Economy provides resources, legal resources, and support to investors all across the country to make sure they're not operating with misinformation about what the legal landscape looks like. Look, you can still invest in Black and brown businesses, but if you read some papers or listen to some commentators, you would think that is entirely illegal to support Black and brown businesses, and that's simply wrong. So I'm spending a lot of time in both of those spaces.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. And I know when we met in real life in Houston, I was asking you about the work that you did with the Fearless Fund, because myself, like Michael, my co-host, and a lot of our listeners are very openly working on programs and initiatives and businesses that impact Black and brown folks. And we're very open about how we market these, and we're very open about how, we talk about these things. And I think one of the things that you said was to be mindful of how that work can also make one a target in this new landscape. And I know a lot of our listeners are not just in the US, they're also like sort of in the global diaspora. But I just wondered, like, is there timely advice that you can share for entrepreneurs who are very pointedly marketing to Black and brown audiences?
Yes, it's difficult to, on a podcast like this, to get into the details.
Of course.
And I want to be clear that I'm not providing legal advice right now. We do provide advice to entrepreneurs and to investors all over the world about what they can and can't do and how they should promote their businesses. But what I'll just say generally is you can and should continue to invest in Black and brown businesses. There is a large disparity in whatever sector we were to identify. Let's just say the venture capital space. People know what venture capitalism is, right? You have a business, you're looking to scale your business, you go out into the marketplace that is often referred to as venture capitalism, and you're looking for an investor. Well, unfortunately, there's $288 billion based on the last account, $288 billion allocated in the venture capital space every single year, at least by last account. Less than 1% goes to Black people.
Wow.
Less than 0.036% goes to Black women.
Yeah.
So unless you're telling me that Black people and Black women are not entrepreneurial, don't have great ideas, are not able to scale businesses, something is wrong with that number.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So what we're doing is making sure people are aware of the data and the facts and make sure that they can and indeed should continue to invest in under-resourced entrepreneurs. Because if you're Black and brown, you're under-resourced. You don't have the resources to scale your business. The data doesn't lie. And so for those who are still looking to invest or seeking investments, they should focus on the data and the facts. Yes, highlight and amplify your idea. Why it is scalable, why people should invest in your company. But also, I think it's important to recognize going into these meetings where you're doing the pitches that there's no equity here right now.
Of course.
There's a lack of equity in these spaces, and be aware of that as you go into these rooms. Of course, we know and have known for a long time that when you're proposing an idea, when you're pitching an idea, when you're showing up in a courtroom, you have to be better than everyone else. It's just unfortunately the reality that people of color live with in this country. And so that is no different when you're going into pitch an idea or seek an investment. But don't be kowtowed to the false narratives that suggest that it is unlawful, illegal, improper to invest in Black and brown businesses. It's simply not true.
Yeah, no, I hear that. And I think that is a really important reminder. There's a reality beyond the headlines a lot of the time. And while it's obviously very fashionable now to report on the abandonment of DEI and the decline of its success, I was literally just at a Black Tech event last night. There were 200 plus people in the room, most of whom were investors keen to meet with Black entrepreneurs. So yeah, I think the reality is always a much more nuanced story. I kind of wanted to switch gears a little bit because even though more recently I'm aware of your work through the Global Black Economic Forum and, representing Fearless Fund, you have had a very illustrious career as a human rights and civil rights lawyer and advocate. And, kind of in a figurative way, you've been fighting a lot, right? And in a literal way too. And I feel that that is an energy that a lot of folks from our community often feel. You know, if you're the first Black person to build a health tech solution, the first Black person to build a fintech solution, maybe you're even just the first founder in your family to step into entrepreneurship or to step into a corporate role. Often we're the firsts, and with the firsts comes the fight. So I guess I was just curious to ask you, what gives you, you know, your energy, your motivation, your perseverance? Like, you know, what drives that? Is it the people who are around you? Is it like focusing on the legacy you want to leave behind? I was very curious about the mindset that you adopt to remain optimistic and focused.
For me, they're really two words that I often rely on, and it's perseverance and resilience.
Mm,
It's not just looking at the current population of marginalized communities, it's also looking at our history. And for me, I rely very heavily on our history to keep my fuel full. We can look back and look at the life and times of James Baldwin or Fannie Lou Hamer or Audre Lorde. These are folks who had to fight the establishment for decades in order to have their voices heard. And they had to utilize a substantial amount of creativity to do it. And they continue in our bodies, they continue in our minds, they continue in our spirits today. As we think about all of the formidable challenges that we confront in now and into the future, I'm constantly reminded by our ancestors and what they had to overcome just to exist. That's really important for us to appreciate, that our ancestors died in order for us to be here today. And if we're going to not only honor their legacies, but also honor our legacies, we have to constantly think about how we push, how we are more creative, how we're more entrepreneurial
yes.
than what our instincts, initial instincts may suggest, right?
Yes.
Because let's not forget that we've seen this movie before. We've
Mm,
seen this movie before in other parts of the world. We've seen this movie before in our history. The goal is to beat us down. The goal is to get us to think that we're less than.
yeah.
The goal is to get us to stop fighting for what we deserve, which is equity.
Yes.
And we have to remember that we deserve it. We deserve to be treated the same as everyone else. And you can't suggest that the current landscape should be divorced from our history. You just can't.
Yeah.
And even if you do, you
Mm,
can't ignore the data. You can't
absolutely.
ignore the fact that 99% of the dollars are not going to people of color. There's a problem with that.
Yeah.
And so we have to confront that head on, and we have to constantly think about how we push the rock up the hill. It is a hill. I'm not
Yes.
suggesting it's not hard, but it does require us to constantly think about refueling to do this work.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful, like a really powerful reminder of how history can be the fuel and history can be the motivation. I have a group of other, you know, Black women founders. We meet up all the time. We hold ourselves accountable. We did a movie night the other night and we watched Hidden Figures.
A
And
great
it was
movie.
so great to sit together and watch that and be reminded of, you know, the shoulders that we stand on generations later. So as we move into the final parts of this interview, I was curious if there was any piece of content, it might be a documentary, a book, an article, a podcast, really anything that you have had the chance to consume, you know, in the last few months that really struck a chord with you. Maybe it was really insightful, it was really entertaining, but I was just curious if you had a piece of content that stands out.
Well, I'm a little biased here because I'm a huge Baldwin fan.
Okay.
So I would say I constantly go back to a book that many people don't often reference, but for me, is probably one of the key source materials for me continuing the work that I do. And the book is called Conversations with James Baldwin, and it documents every single interview he's ever done in his life.
Wow.
And it is an extraordinary compilation of his ideas, his thoughts, what motivated him, his struggles. And you see so many parallels between the prior challenges that we confronted and the present challenges we confront today. So I would say that is one. The
Nice.
second that I thought was really, I saw a documentary on HBO called Hostages, Iran. It happened in Iran, and during right before President Carter lost the election.
Okay.
And why is that important? Because as we look at history, we see history repeat itself, and we see influences that inform the electorate's view on politics. No different than what we're seeing today. We have, unfortunately, conflicts all around the world, whether you're talking about the Ukraine or you're talking about Palestine, and how those conflicts are influencing public debate, how they are being used to provide, in some instances, advanced misinformation.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And how, if we're not careful, it could undermine our efforts to advance equity for people of color around the globe. So I thought it was fascinating. It was a compelling documentary. I love documentaries. It's helpful and intriguing to me that when you look at history and you see the parallels, you're able to hopefully prevent them from happening again, or at least educate yourself so that you're aware of how narratives can be used to misinform.
Yeah, that's really powerful. And I think what's great about that documentary in particular, which I haven't had a chance to read, but just thinking of what I have read around that era of, history, to be reminded of how quickly things can change in quite a drastic way. Whether you look at the reality for women, even in Afghanistan today, and compare that to 30, 40 years ago, how drastically that's changed in terms of access to education, access to basic human rights. And I think sometimes in, the Western part of the world, we almost laugh at the idea that things could go back to that level, but it's happened before, so it could certainly happen again. So yeah, I appreciate that reminder.
And I think people should
Yeah.
remember, to your point, if someone were to ask how recently were women allowed to get credit cards, they may say the 1940s, 1950s.
Yeah.
That was in the 1970s.
Wow. That's
So
scary.
it is frightening when you think about how women have been oppressed and continue to be oppressed around the globe, how they continue to be underestimated and undervalued. It was one of the reasons why we took on the Fearless Fund case, where you had Black women that were being just attacked and challenged simply for seeking to support other Black women and other women
Mm,
of color. It continues today, and we have
yeah.
to constantly think about how we fight back.
Yeah, I know. It's an important reminder. We have a lot to learn just from looking around and zooming out, and sometimes we forget that. So before we let you go, I was wondering if you could share with us, with the Techish community, ways that we can support your work. Are there any actions or nudges that you can leave us with today?
Absolutely. So I would say go to our website, www.gbev.com. There's a section that says contact us, reach out to us if you're interested in supporting us in any way. People can come in to support our partnerships. You can come in to serve as a sponsor. We can collaborate on a variety of different initiatives that we have, whether it be on policy, legislation, or just simply leadership development work. Please reach out to us and let us know how you would like to engage. And next year, we will be very actively involved in making sure that we advance a number of new initiatives that relate to entrepreneurship and providing a construct for more people to get involved. I envisioned that we will face some challenges next year, and significant challenges, and we need to be prepared for those. So I would encourage folks to reach out to us, follow us on all of our social platforms, and get involved.
Amazing. Well, I'll be sure to include links to all of that in the show notes, including the documentary Hostages and conversations with James Baldwin. But I will leave you to get on with your busy day for now. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.